Eastern Europe, I'm here inspired by this current of school of political economic analysis, which emphasizes the importance of the ownership more than indicators of national income per capita in measuring the wealth of nations. Yes? Typically, we are talking about GDP as a measurement of whether your nation is successful or not successful and is in need for further assistance, development, and so on. But there is a perspective which has recently been strongly popularized, mainly by Thomas Piketty, on social inequalities that focuses on ownership differences, not only on income differences. And inequalities in terms of ownership tend to be more pronounced than those measured by income. And this can be illustrated by the situation of post-communist Poland. Why people are usually avoiding to give this ownership measurement? It is more complicated to take into account. Why? Because information on total assets are often more difficult to access. And because it should take into account all liabilities, loans, debts, mortgages, and so on and so forth. So it is more complicated than GDP. GDP is very statistically easily available. However, it can be argued that this is ownership, which, including assets as commodity and stock securities, that determines the generalized social status to much greater extent than income statistics tracked at a selected moment in time, both in the context of individuals as well as entire countries. Because once we come down to the region of Central and Eastern Europe, whose largest country is Poland, Piketty, and we have to remember that this data we'll be referring at the moment is relatively outdated because it was done, as far as I remember, around 10 years ago, so the situation could slightly change from this time. So Piketty estimates that Western agents, corporations and other things, took over about 1/4 of the Polish general national wealth, including properties. And more than half if we include enterprises. In the case of the largest companies, he claims that the share of foreign owners is even higher. This external ownership control resulted in outflow of cash, capital, from the local economies, Eastern European economies, to the Western core countries. Yes. And as I mentioned earlier, it greatly exceeded the inflow from the subsidiaries coming from European Union to the Eastern European member states. And here is the deal. Because when we take into account level of GDP per capita in Poland, it is much greater than the GDP level of Greece, Portugal, Baltic states, and so on. And Poland, in fact, is these days 5th European Union economy. Yes. So it looks like we are a relatively wealthy nation. Therefore, I'm talking about dependent development, not on the exploitation and things like this, because it is not a very straightforward situation of exploitation we are talking about here. It is hard to spot. It is a sophisticated thing. As always, capitalism was smart. And in terms, just to give you, also yesterday I read in the newspapers that the Poland is, according to statistical data, the 3rd NATO state in terms of the army. First is United States, second Turkey, and third Poland. So we exceeded in terms of the military equipment and other things, Germany, France, Italy, and Britain. And also I would be more skeptical about the statistical things. I would like to see about the real capabilities. I'm not that great, doesn't matter. Now, so currently, according to GDP, the Polish economy amounts to, say, 1/3 of Germany economy, according to GDP. However, when the first attempts were made estimating the actual wealth of Polish people that would take into account foreign debt in various forms, including private loans in foreign banks and so on, results were shocking, actually. Less optimistic than these declarations I was just giving you. Some audit reports demonstrated that the wealth of statistical poll in 2012, so the situation may have changed, but there are not too many actually available data which calculated all these things which would take into account, GDP, income, and ownership. But in 2012, it came out that the wealth of statistical Polish man was about 50 times smaller than the wealth of an average German individual, if we take into account all these ownership issues. And about 20 times smaller than the assets of average Greek. And Greece is a relatively poor country. So we have to be aware of this situation. We are sometimes miraculously covered by these ideological assumptions, claiming day after day that we are great. Yes.
Sir, may I ask, when you say that the GDP is 1/3 of Germany, that's gross domestic product for the whole country.
Yes.
When you talk about the average income of the man on the street, it's 1/50th. So that goes to what the income per capita or something like that, is it?
When it comes to average income, these days in Poland, it is also relatively high. But it never takes into account your liabilities. And this is my argument, yes. That for instance, I can get, and I think these days in Poland, an average income, and I'm not talking about Warsaw, because in Warsaw as a capital city it is even higher. I think it's like 1,500 euro or something like this, on average, or even close to 2,000 euro.
Per month?
Per man, per individual. So it's not too bad, somebody would say. But once you try to equate this with these liabilities, then it comes all this equation I'm giving you, this disparity existing between the official income or GDP data and liabilities which are there, which are the consequences of this dispossessions taking place, especially in the early 1990s when the neoliberal transformation came to Poland and all the national wealth, economy sectors, infrastructures were sold out on the very low prices.
GNP wouldn't be a better measure?
What?
GNP instead of GDP, GNP would be a better measure.
I don't think so. I think similarly because it doesn't take also all these liabilities into account. This liabilities is very hard to calculate because they are individually dispersed, and it would take a very meticulous job to calculate everything. Therefore, we do have some data, but it is very much outdated data, yes, because nobody really deals with this. And not only in the case of Polish society, with any type of societies. I can assume that here in Malaysia, probably you would be also confused when it comes down to this issue.
We probably have very similar situation. It's very capitalistic society, and also investment from overseas and taking back money from overseas.
Exactly, because when we are thinking about, for instance, Polish banks and so on, they are only by the very name Polish banks. They are not Polish.
Yes.
Their headquarters are in New York City, London, or
Same here.
And this changes everything. This changes everything, in fact. Okay, I could continue then, and we can discuss this. So.